Now that Brother Felix Y. Manalo was laid to rest, would the church be able to remain one cohesive body and continue on with its mission? Or would the critics' expectations come true, that the Iglesia ni Cristo would eventually fall apart once the man who began the mission was gone? Much to the disappointment of the detractors of the Iglesia ni Cristo, the church, instead of withering and disintegrating, continued to grow larger and stronger. 10 years before he passed away, on January 28, 1953, Brother Felix Manalo called a conference of district ministers, which unanimously elected Brother Eraño Manalo to succeed Brother Felix as the next executive minister of the Iglesia ni Cristo. At that time, Brother Eraño was already an ordained minister, actively leading congregations in various missionary and administrative works.
He was the third son of the Sigo Felix Manalo. He was a very insightful man, although he was quiet. And I think his own charisma to lead the people of the church.
In the next 10 years after Brother Eraño's election, Brother Felix continued personally teaching Brother Eraño as a public speaker, debater, and administrator of the church. Brother Felix Manalo trained his successor following the biblical precedent set by Moses, who trained his successor, Joshua. On April 23, 1963, after Brother Felix Manalo passed away, the 38-year-old Brother Eraño took the mantle of leadership of the Iglesia ni Cristo. The new and young executive minister had a formidable task ahead of him. The only executive minister the members of the church had ever known, they recognized as God's last messenger. And they were still grieving the loss of Brother Felix Manalo. Many outside the church doubted that Brother Eraño would be up to the challenge. Accompanied by the senior ministers of the church, Brother Eraño immediately embarked on pastoral visitations in various provinces in the Philippines, consoling the grieving church by continuously teaching what Brother Felix Manalo had always reminded the church members. Provided that you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel which you heard, rooted and built up in Him, and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. Members of the Iglesia ni Cristo also never stopped sharing their faith. The church continued the vigorous missionary campaigns and evangelical missions in public plazas, resulting in thousands of new members each month. As new congregations arose, more ministers were needed to keep teaching the growing number of members God's Word. Following the example set by Brother Felix Manalo, Brother Eraño Manalo conducted an ordination of ministers on July 14, 1964. It was followed by more ordinations, strengthening the ministerial workforce to take care of the church. Aware of the growing needs of an ever-expanding church, Brother Eraño also further systematized the reporting of all aspects of the church's condition. This would enable him to oversee every aspect of the church's development, no matter how far the church's growth would reach. Brother Felix Manalo had begun a massive program for the construction of numerous worship buildings. Under Brother Eraño Manalo, this not only continued, but the rate of construction was even able to increase. On July 27, 1964, the Iglesia ni Cristo successfully celebrated its golden anniversary with Thanksgiving worship services to God held in all the local congregations of the church. The largest of these worship services was held at the Araneta Coliseum, then reportedly the world's largest dome stadium. The 16,500-seater building was filled to capacity with delegates from local congregations all over the Philippines. The mettle of the Iglesia ni Cristo's young and dynamic leader would be tested early on in his administration of the church. Barely 2 years in office, and the persecution against the church increased. One of the severest took place in a hacienda, or large sugarcane plantation in the province of Tarlac. Because of a labor dispute, the church members working as farmers in Hacienda Luisita encountered hostility.
They were workers in huge haciendas or plantations, whether these be sugar or rice. That's the tradition we were coming from. And therefore, poverty was systematically built into the feudal system.
Non-members spoke ill of the Iglesia Ni Cristo members. They would refuse to sell the brethren food or use public vehicles. What was once one ride to the worship service by jeepney became several kilometer treks under scorching heat or heavy rain. There were times that it was not just their livelihood that was threatened, but even their lives as well. Concerned about the welfare of the members in Hacienda Luisita, Brother Eraño turned to the words of God written in the Bible for guidance. He not only continued to edify the members' faith through worship services, but also carefully followed what is written in 1 John 3:17-19, to love the fellow Christians by extending help to them. The church administration promptly instructed that the brethren in Hacienda Luisita be transferred to the province of Nueva Ecija. There, the church had purchased barren land to be developed into a farming community, which they called Barrio Maligaya, inaugurated on February 22, 1965. The church members from different places worked hand in hand to provide shelter and livelihood to over 1,000 brethren from the hacienda. This project became a model of community development programs in the whole country. The Barrio Maligaya resettlement program started the various housing projects of the Iglesia Ni Cristo all over the Philippines. The phenomenal success of the church became more noticeable not only in the Philippines, but also in other countries. A scholar and professor at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California, Professor Donald McGavran, observed that the Iglesia Ni Cristo has grown very rapidly and as such is of interest to all concerned with church growth. The persecution in Hacienda Luisita, which the Iglesia Ni Cristo had gone through, seemed to have been much lighter compared to the upcoming challenge the church and its new executive minister had to face. Representative Miguel Cuenco, a devout Catholic and a brother of a highly influential archbishop in the Philippines, together with some 80 legislators, introduced House Bill number 13043, known as the Cuenco Bill, to allow public school teachers designated by a priest or minister to the principal to teach voluntarily religion in public schools. Brother Eraño understood that the bill, in its implementation, especially in the rural areas of the provinces, could be used to open the doors to school-sanctioned religious persecution of children of minority religions in the schools, and the teaching of unbiblical religious beliefs to them. As a Protestant author documenting the situation wrote, angered by attempts to railroad the bill through the lower house last March without a public hearing, 20,000 members of the Iglesia Ni Cristo demonstrated before the chamber. The bill was never passed. As the church continued to successfully rise above severe tests and persecution, the world's economic situation was heading the opposite direction. Poverty was getting worse and more widespread. More and more Filipinos could barely afford their basic needs, and many, including Iglesia Ni Cristo members, began looking for greener pasture abroad. Meanwhile, in the United States, a social revolution was underway.
Since the American Immigration Law of 1965, I think, which allowed for very substantial Filipino migration. This also was a means of very rapid diffusion of the faith, essentially being piggybacked on the Philippine diaspora.
Members of the Iglesia Ni Cristo who found jobs and settled abroad became instrumental for the work of salvation to reach other countries. The year was 1968. There has never been a year like it, according to Mark Kurlansky Cape, a famous author. Time magazine subtitled their 40th anniversary special commemorative edition of 1968 as the year that changed the world.
1968 was one of the most tumultuous years of the post-World War II era. A time of war and assassination, civil unrest, and deep political division.
This milestone year in world history was also a milestone year in the history of the Iglesia ni Cristo. A growing number of church members who had migrated to the United States had been sending requests to the church administration for a minister to be sent to them to oversee their spiritual needs. In early 1968, a drafted petition from the brethren in San Francisco, followed by another letter personally delivered by a group of brethren from Hawaii, was brought to Brother Eraño Manalo. Brother Eraño was moved by the brethren's plea. However, how would the church administration respond to this? The number of ministers still wasn't enough to cover all the congregations in the Philippines, and the language of instruction, whether during Bible studies or worship services, had been only in the native tongue. Was the church financially capable to sustain such a mission? Were the ministers, with their families, prepared to be sent to other parts of the world? For guidance, Brother Eraño steadfastly prayed to God and turned to the Bible for inspiration. He found the answer. It was written in Isaiah 59:19 and 43:5. So shall they fear the name of the Lord from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun. From the far east will I bring your offspring, and from the far west I will gather you. Brother Eraño immediately embarked on a journey to Hawaii. On July 27, 1968, he officiated the first worship service in Honolulu. Before proceeding to California to officiate worship services there in the mainland USA, Brother Eraño left Brother Pedro Memban II to be the first resident minister in Hawaii. In California, Brother Eraño met with the brethren and joined them in searching for more members there. After officiating the first worship services of the church in California, he left there Brother Cipriano Sandoval to be the first resident minister in California. These gatherings marked the beginning of the church's worldwide expansion.
And I raised the three points. まず第一にですね、やはり教祖のマナロさんの非常にカリスマティックなダイナミックな説教の影響が一つあります。2番目にはやはりイグレシアにクリストが創立された時の他の教会の問題をイグレシアにクリストが抗議したことですね。これはやはり貧しい人にとっては非常に圧迫感を感じていたことをマナロさんが攻撃したわけです。これは大きな魅力だったと思います。3番目にはやはり既存の教会が強調していた神と個人の関係をマナロさんはそれを尊重しますけど、それと同時に家族を中心にあるいはコミュニティを中心にした教会を作り上げたことですね。それによってやはり総合援助の組織を作って貧しい信者を助けていく。これが一つに非常に大きな成功の理由だったと思います。So these are the 3 points.
The church all the more intensified in its missionary efforts by proclaiming God's words in large assemblies both in the Philippines and abroad. To facilitate a faster dissemination of God's words to the masses, the church utilized mass media. In 1967, the church religious views aired over the radio through DZEC, the first church-affiliated radio station. 2 years later, the church launched its own radio station, DZEM, on February 1969. The biblical teachings upheld by the Iglesia ni Cristo were first aired on television on August 18, 1982. Later, the church launched its own TV program, Ang Iglesia ni Cristo, over MBS Channel 4. With the success achieved by the initial telecasts, the church TV programs have since been aired over different TV channels. In 1983, the church began airing religious programs outside the Philippines, particularly in California, resulting in even more people joining the Iglesia ni Cristo. The numbers of the brethren were increasing. More local congregations needed to be established. More houses of worship needed to be built. More ministers needed to be recruited and trained. And the church was expanding its means of disseminating the faith as the overseas mission was commencing. As the church quickly spread around the world, the field for the church's work became as vast as the world itself. How could the church take care of the spiritual needs of the brethren in various parts of the world, with the quickly growing needs of the church in mind, while also with a vision of the church's future? Brother Eraño Manalo planned the construction of a bigger INC central office along Commonwealth Avenue in Quezon City to house the various departments within the church. Many at that time wondered why there. By the late 60s, Commonwealth Avenue was a dark and lonely road, and the land all around it barely developed. With the former central offices located in heavily populated areas like Tondo, San Juan, and Makati, moving to Commonwealth seemed like a step in the wrong direction. However, the vision of the church administration was proven to be guided by the Holy Spirit. On May 10, 1971, the beautiful and magnificent central office of the Iglesia ni Cristo was inaugurated along Commonwealth Avenue. It stands majestically in what is today the widest and one of the busiest roads in a key city in the country. As the church gained greater momentum for edification and propagation campaigns, the political and economic condition in the Philippines was deteriorating at an uncontrollable rate. By 1972, political protests became common. The communist insurgency led by the New People's Army, modeled after the communists of Maoist China, were growing in numbers and boldness. With violence spreading from the rural provinces into the cities, another challenge arose, putting pressure on the church.
I signed Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire Philippines under martial law.
Definitely there was political turmoil in the air. You needed to apply to an office under the office of the president for permission to leave the country. The Congress was padlocked, so how could you have debates? There was not a single newspaper that was being circulated. No. Television stations were locked up, were closed down.
The church was not spared of the effects of martial law. A Cornell University professor, David Werfel, relates in his book Filipino Politics, on the day martial law was declared, the only bloodshed occurred when armed guards at the Iglesia's radio station resisted the takeover by the Philippine Army. The brethren's lives were not only put in danger, but their freedom as well to conduct worship services to God and missionary works. The Church of Christ upholds the democratic ideal of separation of church and state. It supports through peaceful and legal means the right and freedom of its members to conduct worship and other religious activities as provided for and protected by the fundamental law of the land. Also, the church puts a premium on lawfulness and discipline. It complies with the apostolic teaching to submit to human authority, that is, the duly constituted government, and abide by its laws. But over and above any law, its members obey the laws of God for Christians in our time, as written in the Bible. The challenge then was, would the church be pressured and stop fulfilling its obligation and be hindered in serving God? In a national referendum for the extension of martial law in 1975, the Iglesia stood openly against it. Professor Werfel writes, President Marcos was furious and called Bishop Manalo to Malacanang, threatening him with retaliation. But the bishop had hundreds of his loyal supporters at the palace gates, and the two men quickly reached an understanding to avoid interference in each other's affairs. Like Brother Felix before him, Brother Eraño Manalo stood firm in making sure that the freedom of the members of the Iglesia ni Cristo to carry on their religious services would always be protected. For the church administration, the spiritual welfare of the brethren is a top priority. In the meantime, the Iglesia ni Cristo spreading outside the Philippines meant new challenges to face. The members they were overseeing were hundreds of miles apart from each other. Travel would be long and tiring, and at times dangerous due to inclement weather. The members as well shared in the sacrifices, also often traveling many hours to make it to the worship services, many of which were held in small rental halls. But no distance or any other hindrance could deter the brethren as they sought peace from their daily struggles in a new land through God's inspiring words being preached so powerfully in the worship services. The church members, as Brother Eraño had always taught them, held on to God's instruction. Some people have given up the habit of meeting for worship, but we must not do that. We should keep on encouraging each other, especially since you know that the day of the Lord's coming is getting closer. Because of this, church members became even more steadfast in the faith, and the congregations continued to grow. In only a few decades, hundreds of local congregations were established, covering not only the United States, but also all the habitable continents of the world.
And I've noticed that besides the Catholic Church, of course, you have the second largest congregation. And largest because they're organized is the Iglesia ni Cristo. Wherever they go, bring with them their faith.
With the church now spreading all over the world, spreading the gospel required more ministers to conduct Bible studies and oversee the spiritual needs of the brethren. Many of the pioneering ministers abroad faced language and cultural barriers. Because of this, Brother Eraño saw the need for more standardized training of ministers to take care of the ever-increasing number of congregations. Starting with a program that was used in the Ang Klase that Brother Felix Y. Manalo instituted as a base, Brother Eraño established in 1974 the Ministerial Institute for Development, which is now known as the College of Evangelical Ministry, a formal educational institute for the training of ministers.
The church spends a great deal of money and effort in its training programs, ministerial training programs, as well as more you'd frame in terms of bureaucratic.
While giving prime concern to the administration of the spiritual needs of its members, the church continued to be responsive to the needs of the society at large, willing to extend its help to members and non-members alike. Under Brother Eraño Manalo's direction, the Iglesia ni Cristo established programs which provide relief goods and various health services, including medical and dental missions, family planning teams, and nutrition education. In addition to this, during the administration of Brother Eraño, the church, attending to the educational needs especially of the youth, established a non-sectarian and non-profit school, the New Era University. The Iglesia ni Cristo continues to provide various community service programs in all the places where it is established, from the remotest villages of the provinces to the most prominent urban areas of the metros.
The church should provide, again, spiritual support, but at the same time, socio-economic support, so that they can practice what they learn from the church.
Knowing the importance that the Bible places on strong family values, the church all the more intensified the involvement of the Christian family organizations, which had been established since the time of Brother Felix Manalo to edify their faith. The Buklod, Kadiwa, and Binhi led the church in various missionary and edification efforts and launched social projects such as the adult education, summer kindergarten, and community and environmental programs.
One thing I was very impressed by some of the Iglesia ni Cristo people I met. They're highly disciplined, very, very hardworking. They're serious workers. Your church also emphasized that the collective cooperation among the church members.
With the church's continuous growth, also came the need for bigger worship buildings where Iglesia ni Cristo members could worship God. In the early 80s, as the church approached its 70th anniversary, Brother Eraño Manalo began the plan for the construction of the Iglesia ni Cristo's biggest worship building, a temple close to the church's central office where thousands of church members could conduct worship services to God. There was one problem, however.
We had a series of economic crises. First, you had the oil crisis of 1973-74, and then 1979-1980. And then after that, in 1983-84, we had the first debt crisis. That debt crisis was actually set off by the Mexican debt default on its debts.
The plan seemed to be untimely. The country was beset with unprecedented economic crises. Poverty was at its all-time high. Could the church go on with a plan which for many at that time was unrealistically ambitious? Poverty did not hinder the church members in giving their voluntary contributions. They consulted the Bible and followed the example set by the members of the first century Church of Christ. Now, friends, I want to report on the surprising and generous ways in which God is working in the churches in Macedonia province. Fierce troubles came down on the people of those churches, pushing them to the very limit. The trial exposed their true colors. They were incredibly happy, though desperately poor. The pressure triggered something totally unexpected, an outpouring of pure and generous gifts. I was there and saw it for myself. They gave offerings of whatever they could, far more than they could afford, pleading for the privilege of helping out in the relief of poor Christians. Despite the country's fiscal crises, the church proceeded with the construction of the central temple, the Iglesia ni Cristo's largest worship building, which could seat over 7,000 worshipers. Dedicating it to God, a Thanksgiving worship service was held on the 70th anniversary of the Iglesia ni Cristo. This was followed by more construction projects of the church.
It obviously shows an institution that is pretty healthy and is able to mobilize its resources in a way to provide a church building from which its outreach, its missional activities can be carried forth. But I understand it's within the church that you don't get loans from the outside. This is entirely within the church structure, so pretty impressive to say the least.
The year was 1989, a witness to turning points in the history of mankind. In spite of the world's problems, the Iglesia ni Cristo continued to reap successes. It celebrated its 75th foundation anniversary. Leaders of nations sent their warm greetings and congratulations. Brethren all over the world offered praises and glory to God in a Thanksgiving worship service. One of these was the one held at the INC Central Temple. Hundreds of thousands of brethren attended. Many, unable to enter the temple, gathered along Commonwealth Avenue. As the church's progress continued to soar, the world situation continued in its rapid decline. The years that followed the Diamond Jubilee celebration of the Iglesia ni Cristo were afflicted by numerous disasters, both natural and man-made. One of the most severe of these calamities was also one of the largest volcanic eruptions in the 20th century. Millions of people in the central Luzon area of the Philippines were severely affected by the eruption of Mount Pinatubo. Hundreds of thousands were left homeless. There was no food. Towns were buried in the mud flow. No one knew where to go. The faith of the brethren was put to the test, and they responded with faith. Even with their homes now gone, the first thing many members of the church in the affected areas sought after the calamity was a place where they could pray and hold worship services to God. This made finding and gathering them together so much easier. Brother Eraño Manalo was quick in addressing the needs of the brethren. Through the collaborative efforts of the various church departments and of the Christian family organizations, SCAN and social service departments, the Iglesia ni Cristo was one of the first to provide lingap sa mamamayan, aid to humanity, to the affected areas. Brother Eraño also immediately laid out a rehabilitation program to take care of the brethren's welfare. Immediately, the homeless members of the Iglesia ni Cristo were relocated to Palayan City, Nueva Ecija, where many were able to start life anew through various livelihood programs initiated by the church administration.
And that also provided the, in a sense, a mutual help among the followers, economic and social support network among the church members. I think this is very, very important for the growth of the church. So in a sense, your church provides spiritual salvation, but at the same time, socio-economic support for the members of the church.
Many outside observers witness how the Iglesia ni Cristo remained united in helping the brethren who were affected by the calamities. Brother Eraño's leadership in caring for the poor throughout his administration of the Iglesia ni Cristo was also lauded by many non-members as well. An instance of this was in 1991, when he called on the Philippine president and the national leadership to roll back oil prices because the government's policies had been causing too much suffering on the millions of poor in the country. As one newspaper columnist wrote in his column, Eraño Manalo Day. Henceforth, the 22nd day of July might well be known as Eraño Manalo Day, both a secular and religious public holiday. We will explain to our progeny that it is a day specifically set aside for the nation to acknowledge the great gift of a nationalistic religious sect, which in the nick of time saved millions of poverty-stricken Filipinos from a cruel, lingering death at the hands of the multinational oil companies in partnership with a foreign creditors' cowed administration. In all its activities, unity has remained a central characteristic of the Iglesia ni Cristo. Since the Bible defines the church as the one body of Christ with its members bound together by one faith, maintaining the cohesiveness of the church has been a priority of the church administration. With the church being global, having various nationalities and races with varying cultures as its members, Brother Eraño Manalo looked to the latest technology as a means of reaching the members of the church all over the world with God's message. In the early part of 1994, the first satellite-connected International Conference of Ministers was held as a precursor to the upcoming celebration of the church's 80th anniversary. A few months later, in May of 1994, broadcast live via satellite to several locations around the world, was the worship service led by Brother Eraño Manalo that also included an ordination of ministers, several of whom had come from the overseas congregations. It was also on that occasion that Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, Brother Eraño's eldest, and a minister who had been serving as coordinator of Metro Manila, took oath as the Deputy Executive Minister of the Iglesia ni Cristo.
Akong si Eduardo V. Manalo, Ministro sa Iglesia ni Cristo, na lumitaw sa Pilipinas sa bisa ng mga hula ng banal na kasulatan at sa pagsusugo ng Diyos kay kapatid na Felix Y. Manalo, ay nagpapahayag na aking tinatanggap ang tungkuling pangalawang tagapamahalang pangkalahatan. Tutuparin ko ng buong puso at pagmamalasakit ang lahat ng pananagutan at kampaning nasasaklaw ng tungkuling ito, udyok ng pag-ibig sa Diyos, kay Kristo at sa Kanyang Iglesia, upang mapangalagaan ang mga hinirang sa ikatutupad ng layunin ng Diyos na ang lahat ay maihatid sa kaligtasan. Aking ipinangangako na susundin ko, ipatutupad at ipagsasanggalang ang mga aral ng Diyos na nakasulat sa Biblia at ang lahat ng mga tuntuning pinaiiral ng Iglesia ni Cristo. Akin ding ipinangangako na ako'y buong kababaang loob na magpapasakop sa tagapamahalang pangkalahatan ng Iglesia ni Cristo sa huling araw. Tulungan nawa ako ng Diyos.
The church continued on to reap victories from place to place. By July of 1994, Brother Eraño Manalo was in Rome for the registration of the church in the country where the early church fell into apostasy. The worship service to mark this occasion was also broadcast live to several sites around the world, including the multitude of brethren gathered in the central office pavilion in celebration of the church's 80th anniversary. 2 years later, on March 31, 1996, the executive minister came to the city of Jerusalem in Israel for the establishment of the congregation in the very city where the first-century Church of Christ was founded by the Lord Jesus Christ. On May 10, 1997, Brother Eraño led the establishment of the congregation in Athens, Greece, signifying the extension of the Gentile mission. This special event in the Iglesia ni Cristo's history also coincided with the 50th anniversary of Brother Eraño's ordination as a minister of the gospel. In 1998, the entire Iglesia ni Cristo celebrated the 30th anniversary of the church in the far west through various activities. In 2000, upon the instruction of Brother Eraño Manalo, then Deputy Executive Minister Brother Eduardo Manalo was sent to the West for a series of pastoral visitations and ministerial conferences, bringing great joy and edifying the faith of the church members. Because of its contributions in the fields of community development, agrarian reforms, education, and socio-economic programs, the Iglesia ni Cristo, which was once looked down upon as a church from a developing country, received recognition and appreciation from international institutions and governments. In July 2009, the church celebrated its 95th anniversary with a program commemorating God's blessings to His church. The main celebrations were held in 14 selected venues in the Philippines and 5 sites in the U.S. At this time, the church has achieved outstanding and unimaginable successes in all fields. The Iglesia ni Cristo, on its way to its 100 years, was eager to celebrate God's blessings. Every detail of the Centennial program was in its planning stage. The propagation campaigns in celebration for the Centennial, having been laid out since 2006, were geared towards success. The brethren grew more eager to participate in activities, and their fervor in upholding their church duties served as a testament that they wanted to be a part of the Centennial. When everything was well on its way, leading to a great and joyful celebration, news broke out.
It is with deep regret and sorrow that I inform the entire membership of the Iglesia ni Cristo and the nation that our beloved leader, our executive minister, Brother Eraño G. Manalo, passed away at his home at 3:53 p.m. yesterday, August 31, 2009, at the age of 84.
Not just members of the Iglesia ni Cristo, but the whole nation mourned for several days. Even many non-members joined an endless flow of brethren traveling from different parts of the world and waited in line for hours just to have one last glimpse of their dear leader, their beloved brother. The large crowd that filled several kilometers running along Commonwealth and Central Avenue was a testament not only of the love of those millions for Brother Eraño G. Manalo, but even more so of His love for them. Today, his burial site is a mausoleum located in the central office complex, but standing as an even bigger monument to his inspired leadership is a remarkable list of accomplishments of the INC, as the church poised for a future even more remarkable.
Gusto natin ang Iglesia ay tumatag. Ang sabi ng Biblia, ang Diyos ang magpapatatag sa bansa, ang Diyos ang mag-iingat sa kanyang bayan, ang Diyos ang magbibigay ng karunungan at kaalaman. Kailan? Kung ang bayang yon, ang pangunahing yaman, ay ang paggalang sa Panginoon Diyos. Pero mga kapatid, kung narinig ninyo ang sabi ng Diyos, kapag kayo nagkaisa ng diwa at puso sa pagsunod sa akin, ito'y para sa inyong kabutihan hanggang sa inyong mga anak. Yan po lang ang susi. Simpleng-simple lang. Ang susi ng tagumpay, ang susi ng ikatatatag ng Iglesia, ang susi para sa ikapagkakaroon ng magandang wakas. Di ho ba sabi ko sa inyo kanina na magsama-sama tayo na ang yakapin naman natin ay pagsunod. Kaya mga kapatid, tandaan nyo sabi ng Diyos, pag ginawa natin yung bahagi natin, gagawin niya yung bahagi niya. Ano yun? Pagpapalain ko kayo habang panahon. Patatatagin ko kayo. Sabi ng Diyos, buong puso at kaluluwa, gagawin ko sa inyo yan. Ano kailangan ng Iglesia? Ang kailangan ng Iglesia, may Espiritu Santo. Ang kailangan ng Iglesia, binubuhusan ng Diyos ng kanyang Espiritu. Bakit? Ano ba yung Espiritu? Yun ang patotoo na sumasama ang Diyos sa iyo. Ang sabi ng Diyos, lakasan mo ang iyong loob sa paglaban, alang-alang sa iyong kahalalan. Ipakipaglaban mo yung kahalalan. Saan po tayo inaakit? Pagka dumating sa ating buhay, ang katulad ng narinig ninyong nilalamon ng pagkabagabag, ng lulupaypay dahil sa pagdurusa, ang sabi niya, pati buto ko ay nanghihina. Ngunit, ako'y nagtitiwala sa iyo, Panginoon, na ikaw ang aking Diyos at ang aking panahon ay nasa iyong mga kamay. Paliliwanagin mo ang aking mukha at ako'y ililigtas mo sa pamamagitan ng pag-ibig mong hindi kumukupas. Ano po ang dapat na maging damdamin ng mga Iglesia ni Cristo? Pagka dumarating ang hirap, parisan ninyo ang sabi ng Biblia, kapag ikaw ang aking kasama, anuman ang hirap ay aking masasalubong.